Hello, I hope you're doing well, and it's been a long time since I last filmed a video, but I've been away. I had to take an exam, and this one was another licensing exam, but for a different country, and this one was even harder. Like the last one that I took was in March, and that one was only like 5 hours, but for this one, this one is 9 hours, and the prep for it was really intense, and the question stems, the format of the exam was just so much more difficult. The answer choices were more vague, and even though it's all MCQ, it's sort of like which answer is the best answer for this patient. Walking out of the exam, I felt fine actually. I didn't feel that drained or exhausted, but the hard days were the days that followed the exam because I got really into my head. I couldn't remember any of the questions in the exam. I couldn't remember how I did, what I saw, and that really freaked me out because I was like, did I just blank out for 9 hours? And so I convinced myself that I failed, but I got my exam results yesterday, and luckily I did good. And so that's been a huge relief. I feel like it still hasn't sunk in yet. But anyway, that's what's been going on with my life. But now to my favorite topic, books. So lately when it comes to books, my picks have been horrible. Everything that I read, I'm like at best okay with. And I'm not sure why that actually, maybe I do know why that is. I think I've been relying too much on recommendations from the outside. The last book that I read that I just finished is I Am Not Your Perfect Mexican Daughter. I think out of the books that I read recently, this is probably the best one or one of the best ones. You follow this girl, her name's Julia, and she's in her senior year in high school, and she dreams of becoming a writer and going to university. And I really liked her, honestly, as a main character. And her family dynamic is very complicated. At the very beginning of the story, you find out that her older sister passed away. And Julia used to think that her sister was perfect because she was quiet, she was reserved, she wanted to spend all her time with her family, and she was the opposite of her. And so she felt like she didn't have that much in common with her. She started discovering more and more secrets regarding her older sister, and that changed her perception on her sister. A lot of this book deals with what you potentially owe to your family and what they owe to you. I did really like this book, but I just don't think it was the book for me. I would recommend it to someone younger than me, maybe someone in middle school, even though the topics that it deals with are really heavy, which surprised me, because usually when books target a younger audience, I feel like they are scared to address certain topics such as sexual assault, but this book did not shy away from those heavier topics. And I definitely commend the author for that, because I see it often where older people don't take young people as seriously. They don't take their pain as seriously. They think they're ignorant to the world around them, and that's not the case. When it comes to kids, they're just so often dismissed from any discussion, even though they're experiencing the world too. So I think by discussing these heavier topics in an accessible manner to children, it might actually do more good than bad. And so for what this book is and the ideas that it represented, I did really like it, even though the writing style wasn't for me, even though there were quite a few loose ends. I still am really glad that I read it, and I feel like it's an important book. Just yesterday, I started The Emperor of Gladness, and that's by Ocean Vuong. That's my first book by him. I keep hearing about him, and first of all, his name is really cool, and all of the titles for his books are amazing. Like, I love when titles are nice. And so I started reading this one, and immediately from the very first sentence, I was blown away. And so I have really high hopes that I'll end up really, really liking this book. So I read the first couple pages. I loved it. I loved how descriptive it was. But then when I got to the end of the first chapter, I almost immediately dropped it because I was like, I'm not ready for this. Something happens. I don't want to spoil it, but the story didn't go where I thought it was going to go. And so I'm going to continue reading it. Another book that I really need to finish, I'm actually really close to finishing it. I only have like 30 pages left, but it's كبرت ونسيت أن أنسى by Buthayn al-Isa. And this book, it's in Arabic, but I'm pretty sure it's been translated in English because she's quite popular. She's a writer from Kuwait. I was at the bookstore and I was like browsing around and I saw this cover and I really liked the title. It means I grew up and I forgot to forget. And so that intrigued me. And I read the first few pages and the main character was so angry. She was so angry and I was really drawn to that. It follows this one girl who's orphaned and she's forced into the care of her older brother. Her older brother is much older than her and like he's already got a family and everything and he's very conservative and he limits a lot of the things that she does and she finds freedom, I guess you could say, in writing, specifically writing poetry. And that becomes an outlet, a very important outlet for her. But you see as she struggles to be herself in a world that constantly tells her, you're not enough, like you shouldn't be like this. And honestly, I do really like it. It did lose me a bit in the middle. There was like a change in format, but it got me again. And so I'm excited to finish it. Finished this book. Amazing, incredible. Yeah, I loved it. So I just finished reading what I think has been my favorite book that I picked up this year and honestly in a while. I honestly went in with the intention of reading this for like 10 or 15 minutes and then I ended up just reading the whole thing in one go. So the name of the book is The Witnesses Are Gone. And I've never heard of the author before. I do remember that a YouTuber mentioned this book and I really liked the title. I went back just now to see if I could find the video and in the thumbnail it said existential horror. And I believe that that's what hooked me, that plus the title. I was immediately hooked by the opening paragraph. Maybe if I hadn't bought the house, I wouldn't have found the videos and none of this would have happened. Judith would still be alive and I'd have lost nothing except some memories I could live without. But I'm not convinced. I think it would just have found another way of happening. Even before it all started, I felt like I was living backwards. The future seemed more real than the past. While reading the story, I was genuinely so unsettled. I was scared and I'm really glad that I read it in daylight because I don't think I could have read this at night. The story isn't scary in the traditional sense. It's more so scary because it has elements that reflect the human experience, the parts of the human experience that we tend to bury. It's about this 40-year-old man who becomes obsessed with this film and filmmaker. And you see the journey that that obsession takes him on. I've never read anything like this before. I don't think I'll ever read anything like this again. And I just feel like what I experienced through reading this book is something really special. Or like for me personally, obviously. But I'm sure that there are others that it might have moved in the same way. And so yeah, I guess that's all I have to say about it for now. I feel like it won't be long before I reread the story. And honestly, for some reason, I feel like bits of it are gonna visit me in my dreams. This is my favorite food, basically. I don't know what it's called in English, but it's molokhia. So I finished reading 2 books this last week that I wanted to talk about because I actually ended up really enjoying both of them. So the first book that I finished is The Emperor of Gladness by Ocean Vuong. In this story, you follow this 19-year-old boy. His name is Hai, and his relationships to his surroundings and the people around him. But the parts of the story that really stood out to me was his relationship with this old woman, as well as his relationship with his cousin, or one of his cousins, and his relationship with his mother, which is complicated, but it's one that's definitely filled with love. And something that I really liked about the story was, first of all, I never knew where it was going. And so there was a lot of things happening at the same time, but it's not that it was overly complicated. It's just there was a lot of things happening in the same way that in your own life, there's usually more than one thing going on. By the end of the book, not everything was wrapped up. There wasn't a conclusion to everything that was addressed in the book. And I felt like even though not everything was tied up neatly, it still didn't feel like the book was incomplete. And honestly, I feel like that's something that's really hard to do for a writer. For a reader to walk away with questions, but still feel like this was a complete book, a complete story. I was honestly just really impressed by that. I'm definitely someone that tends to gloss over like descriptions of settings and places in stories. I sometimes just find them really boring, if I'm being honest. But here, the environment was definitely an important part of the story, and it definitely felt like its own character. The other book that I just finished, like maybe an hour ago or so, is called The Safe Keep. So this is a historical fiction book, and it's a romance. I think I would consider it a romance book. I've mentioned it before, but I don't really read romance all that much. I think I just don't know how to pick a good one, honestly. And so I'm just more comfortable picking different types of books. But this was a book that I really did enjoy. And I enjoyed it for several reasons. One of which is that I found the main character really interesting. Essentially, in the story, you follow this 30-year-old woman. Her name is Isabel, and she lives in this house. And honestly, she's just mean. She's arrogant. She likes things done in a certain way, and if they're not done in a certain way, then she's very vocal about it. And she's just not a likable character. But honestly, those are my favorite types of characters to read about, especially when they're women, because I just feel like growing up, a lot of the stories and the media I consumed definitely depicted women in a certain way, in a likable way. Usually they were the compassionate ones, the empathetic, generous kind. And those qualities were seen as things inherent to the gender rather than personality traits of that particular character. And so I just really appreciate depictions of women in other forms, I suppose. And this was one of those cases where I just really liked learning about why she was the way that she was. The story is essentially a coming of age story. I also ended up learning about something that I've never known about, but I don't really want to mention what it is because I think it could be considered a spoiler. The majority of the book is pretty slow, but I definitely do like slow-paced books. So I think for me personally, it wasn't an issue. But one thing that I felt like was underdeveloped was the process by which the main character falls for her partner. I just felt like I needed more. I wasn't convinced of why she felt so strongly for her. The actual romance was beautiful, and the intimate moments were written so beautifully, and so overall, I honestly really enjoyed the book. Next book, I think I'm gonna give 100 Years of Solitude another try. I think at that point there was just a lot going on. I was in Sudan, and then I went to Malaysia, and then China, and so it was just a lot. Now I'm gonna try it again, read it from the beginning, and we'll see how far I go. currently at page 103, and as you can tell, I'm really liking it. Something I'm finding really interesting about this book is that the paragraphs are like pretty long, and there's not that much dialogue. Like, there's dialogue also incorporated in the long paragraphs, but it's still not a lot. And I guess that's not really something I've noticed in other books. And so I just find that pretty interesting.